I think we'll get started. Once again, welcome to our webinar on Bill C-8. My name is Teresa Pierre, and I'm the president of Parents as First Educators. With me as my co-host is Queenie Yu. And our special guest this evening is Dr.Ann Gillies, who is a psychotherapist, as I mentioned before. And she has published a book, we were just saying, called Closing the Floodgates, Setting the Record Straight About Gender and Sexuality. She has made a couple of presentations in the last few weeks in Edmonton and Calgary on their gender conversion therapy bans. And she's here to talk a little bit about what happened there and what we can learn from it as we go forward to confront Bill C-8, which is the federal conversion therapy bill. We would welcome questions from the audience tonight, and the way to get them to us is to use the chat window. You will find the chat feature there. It's the center button. If you tap that, a window will come up to your right, and there's a button at the left that says you can choose who your chat's going to go to. Choose Queenie Yu, and she will be monitoring our questions tonight. So you can just write them down as you think of them, and we're probably going to hold them till the end, but we'll be able to ask them to whoever you're interested in asking them to. Now, I'd like to turn the floor over to Dr. Ann Gillies, and she's going to tell us about what happened in Calgary.
Happy to do that. So I'm going to first of all discuss some of the elements of the bylaw that was passed in Calgary. And there's some good news along with some of the negative news. So don't lose all hope. I don't want you to think that all hope is lost. And certainly we are continuing, a group of us are continuing some momentum, certainly to bring awareness into the churches, the Christian church, but also to faith groups, because there were other faith groups that presented as well. And we want to make sure that we are working together. So I'm going to read some elements of the bylaw because I think that's going to be advantageous. So here's what the bylaw actually says. It's called a prohibited business activity conversion therapy. And so this is what the description of conversion therapy is, and I'm going to read it to you, but it's not what people have heard in the media. So it's so different because in the media and roundabout, we've been hearing how torturous this is, and that still is being talked about, and that it's all about electrical shock therapy. But listen to what the actual definition is of conversion therapy. It means a practice, treatment, or service designed to change, repress, or discourage a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, or to repress or reduce non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior. So any effort even to help someone reduce perhaps same-sex attraction in the area of pornography, or their behavior, maybe they feel that they've come to a place where it's kind of taken over their lives and they're more in an addictive, some kind of sexual addiction, that will be outlawed. So this definition also, it does not include the practice, treatment, or service that would relate to a person who has socially or medically or legally transitioned or are in the place of transitioning. And this is a really interesting line. It says, or to a person's non-judgmental exploration and acceptance of their identity and or development. So that's a really interesting thing, because how do you clarify, how do you qualify non-judgmental? So for them, I'm sure it is the thought that anything Christian is judgmental, because we would consider any kind of sex out of the boundary of marriage as sinful. So this bylaw also means that any commercial, merchandising, or industrial activity or undertaking, a profession, a trade, occupation, calling, which we understand from a faith perspective, or employment, or an activity providing goods and services to an individual with unwanted same-sex attraction. Now, we're not talking about people being coerced here. It's not talking about that. It's even people who are willing and wanting help in reducing perhaps some of their behavior, sexual behaviors. So we can help people reduce heterosexual behavior. So say someone's in an adulterous affair and they want to get out of it. We can help that person to save their marriage, but not someone who is same-sex attracted. So this definitely means that churches, church organizations and affiliations and denominations will be subject to this bylaw. So it's pretty draconian in many ways. Then the prosecution for a contravention of this bylaw just has to have one proof of transaction, or if they have seen an advertisement, that's enough to establish that a person is engaged in providing conversion therapy. So it's very broad. Now, this is something that I think people need to sit up and pay attention to. The owner of the property. So if I were to be leasing an office in a building, the owner of the property who's certified, registered as the title, the land's title office, would be equally responsible for the conversion, the therapy that I would be doing. And they would be charged to the same extent as though they were doing the act, which that's just a very, so broad, right? It's like if I did something else, I think I was saying one time that if I rented the property and I committed murder in my office, and the owner would not be liable. He or she wouldn't be charged. But in this bylaw, that's what they're saying. So also, if a corporation commits an offense under this bylaw, so that would mean to me a denomination. So if someone, a pastor or a leader of the church, or I don't even think it would have to be a leader, someone just, well, perhaps a Sunday school teacher speaks to a young person. Every principal, director, manager, officer, employee, or agent of the corporation who actually authorized the or even assented to the talk. So they may not have even known there was going to be a talk between these two people, but they're also guilty. So they'd have to prove this in court, of course, but it does show the ramifications of what they're trying to do. So a summary of the conviction offense is that under this bylaw, a partnership, so the partner would be liable. And here's what the conviction is. It would either be, well, first of all, it's a $10,000 fine. But in default of the payment, then you would be imprisoned for not longer than 1 year. Now that's different than Bill C-8, but this is the Calgary bylaw we're talking about. So 1 year imprisonment, and it's a criminal offense. So remember this, it's under the same category. And I was looking at this Bill C-8 federally, criminal offense, and it's lumped in with sexual pornography, child sex trade, all of those kind of things, like so publishing and distributing child pornography, those kind of things. And I'm thinking, wow, here we have someone like myself, perhaps, who would simply be talking to an individual who came to them wishing to talk about their unwanted same-sex attraction and perhaps wanting to diminish some of those thoughts, attractions, and behaviors, and I would be charged a criminal offense. So that's pretty horrendous. Now, here's the good news, that the church got engaged. So faith communities got engaged in Calgary, and there were 121 oral presentations. At least half of those were by faith, not faith groups, but individuals. And there were over 1,800 written submissions, and at least half of those were by Christians and other faith groups. So that's really, really good. So this is the first time we've really had some opposition, that there's really been some substantial opposition. And I think they weren't expecting that. Obviously not, because it went on for 2 days, the oral presentations. It was a long drawn out affair. But at the end, Councillor Cara said that this bylaw absolutely applies to churches, because throughout the dialogue, councillors had been trying to say, no, this is not about prayer, because that had been asked, and was this about prayer and all that. And no. And at the end, this counselor said, absolutely. So that would mean that pastoral counseling, especially anything on an ongoing basis, would be subject to the fine and conviction. Speaking events where perhaps I would be talking about the benefits of the nuclear family and the man-woman relationship, the marriage, the security that comes to the whole family through that, that would be a problem, because they do not want anything on suggesting that heterosexuality is a normative kind of behavior. And then that a ban on advertising, even word of mouth, although they did admit that it would be very hard to prove word of mouth. But they're trying to incorporate everything you can absolutely think of here. So donations to churches were also something that they're, certainly it's on their radar. And that's not something that should shock us at all. I think for most of us, some faith groups, that we've been seeing some writing on the wall with that for a little while. And then the council did make it clear that, and I mentioned this before, that anyone who openly speaks of a marriage being between a man and a woman, and that sex should be reserved for that institution, would be subject to this sanction. So praying with a person, asking God to change or reduce their sexual attractions or their behavior, providing any kind of counsel in the church or without, and providing any religious practice or programs. So there are many individual parachurch organizations, I would think, would say, that actually do and have helped many people in the past. And I know for the Catholics, Courage is one. There's Exodus Global now, and there's so many other ones. So, but having a prayer ministry, weekend retreat, or discipleship program, all of those things would be subject to this sanction. So helping a child also who wants to become more opposite sex attracted. So if the child is struggling with thoughts, and as you can imagine, children are struggling. Children are very confused now. We're seeing more and more of that. We're seeing more things happen on the school grounds. We're seeing children, older children actually assaulting younger children. And so if a child is having some same-sex thoughts, and they actually want to secure their biological sex, and that will not be allowed. So there's so many things to this bylaw that are really, really far-reaching. And this bylaw really has, it's probably the worst one in North America that we've seen. So I'll take a breath.
Okay. Well, don't take too long, because we have lots of questions for you. But we wanted to get started by asking some questions of our own. And like, for instance, you alluded to this earlier, that the opponents of conversion therapy like to say that it's cruel. And I think a lot of people do still think of electroshock therapy, as you mentioned. But what can you tell us? Can you give us a little bit more information about what methods the counselors are currently using?
Well, for those who are still, for therapists who would dare in this country to actually help someone who came to them with unwanted same-sex attraction, it would be talk therapy. Sometimes people come, see, often people come to a counseling session or seek therapy, and they don't start off the first session talking about unwanted same-sex attraction. They come, you know, they want to check out the therapist, they want to talk about some things, and they kind of want to just, you know, get to know a little bit of the therapist and get to know one another. So you talk, right? And it's about giving the individual an opportunity to share their life story. That's what counseling is about, that they are able for the first time to, perhaps for many of them, to have a safe place where everything is confidential, and they can literally share the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so they talk, right? So a therapist may use different modalities. They may use emotionally focused therapy. They may use narrative therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. So there's all kinds of different kind of models, but it's all about talk therapy. And so when you think about this being cruel, then you would have to say, you know, because that's what is being spouted, that talk therapy now is actually cruel and torturous. And so what about the individuals who go for marriage therapy, who have couple therapy? And, you know, whenever you're dealing with people's life stories, when you're dealing with the emotion, it's not an easy thing. It takes a lot of courage. And it means that sometimes they can leave your office really frustrated with you, because sometimes you just kind of tap a raw spot. And I've had people, you know, not very often, but a couple of times, people go out and slam the door and say, I'm not coming back. And the next 2 weeks they'll be back or whatever. I don't think I've ever had anyone not return. But, you know, it's in a moment of great emotion. And so we tap into all kinds of anger and different things. So yeah, that's what talk therapy is about. And I think if anyone has ever been to a counselor or therapist, they could advocate for that it's not about torture, it's about being able to share. And sometimes in that sharing, there's a lot of pain that comes up. And so certainly the feelings and emotions are there, but that is only to bring resolution for that individual.
Okay. They also say that the science behind this is outdated. What can you what kind of response do you give to that?
Well, I'm currently, actually just yesterday, I have sent a 60-page research review of sexual orientation change therapy to some editors, and so we're trying to get it all finished up. But you know, in 2013, and maybe it's easiest maybe just to read this to you, because I think it's very pertinent to this question. So the Gay Lesbian Medical Association submitted a brief, again this is in the US, in 2013, that said it was on the immutability of sexual orientation. So that means immutability means that it's unchangeable. So they are advocating for this being an unchangeable orientation, identity. And then in 2016, well, it had been going on for a decade before that. This whole other trajectory of sexual fluidity had been gaining momentum within the research community in the area of the LGBTQ. And then in 2016, I have this in my paper. This is what Doctors Diamond and Rosie, and they were actually part of the American Psychiatric Association's task force. And they said this, so this is just 3 years after the Gay and Lesbian Medical Association submitted their brief on the immutability of sexual orientation, same-sex orientation. And Diamond and Rossi said this, arguments based on immutability of sexual orientation are unscientific. And so that really is pretty profound. So what we've actually seen, and certainly what I have encountered as I wrote this paper, is that the research and the things that have been studied previously, and those things espoused have vastly been disallowed. And so when we talk about this conversion therapy ban, and from the activist perspective being that the actual information and the research and all of that is outdated, it's actually the opposite. The activists are using the outdated and unsubstantiated, unproven science. And in fact, in Canada, I've just kind of been looking at some other research, and the things, the research that they submit would never make it in any other kind of work with psychology. Like, it's very biased. There's no random samples, and so it's very skewed. So I mean, there's a lot to think about in all of this.
Okay, great. I've been told that you have some personal experience with this type of counseling. Would you be willing to share some details about what this has meant in your life?
When you talk about counseling, are you talking about talk therapy?
Conversion therapy.
Yeah, conversion therapy, that's, well, and because it really isn't. See, conversion therapy is...
Don't like to use the term, right?
No, we don't. Well,
yeah.
Because it really does not mean anything. There's no course on conversion therapy. It is actually an activist term. So for those, though, who've had unwanted same-sex attraction, I have not spent a lot of time with those individuals. My practice has been on complex trauma. And so my sense from all of this and what I've seen and heard, and certainly what I've researched, is that there's a real converging of traumatic experiences with the same-sex attracted individuals. And from research and from other people that I've talked to repeatedly who have left those attractions by the wayside and have chosen, it's been their choice to embrace a heterosexual life and family. Some of them live celibate lives, others are have their families now. That those individuals, all of them that I have talked to, had some kind of significant trauma, and most, the highest percentage, had experienced childhood sexual abuse or horrific physical abuse. So we have all those things that have already been happening, those comorbidities. And what happens with the activists on the LGBT side is they really want to deny those kind of suggestions, and say that, well, it's because they were traumatized by homophobic people and not accepted by their parents or not accepted by their peers or whatever, that's why they are traumatized. But really, it's far deeper than that. And these bans then will not allow us to help people who have been victimized. It's really draconian in that sense. It's very, very hard for therapists not to help people. That's what we go into this profession for. So it's very sad.
Okay, I'm just going to interject to remind people that if they have questions that they wanted to ask, to use the chat function in Zoom to ask it. And the way to find that is to just mouse over the bottom of your screen. There's a middle button there, which is the chat feature. And if you tap on it, it will open up a window. And if you go to the bottom left of that window, you can see that who you're chatting to, and you should choose Queenie U, and she will be collecting those questions as this goes on. Okay, we do have a question from someone who wrote in ahead of time. And their question to you, Dr. Gillies, was, you mentioned that you were working on a package for pastors to use for the Bill C8. And they were wondering when that pastor package might be ready.
Yes. Oh boy. Well, this paper is one of those, one of the things to go in that packet.
Okay.
Now, there will be other things so there'll be some shorter portions of this paper. There's a group of us also, and there'll be testimonies in that. So here's another thing that we are doing right now is that certainly for any pastors, church leaders, faith groups, there's about 5 of us that are putting together a presentation about an hour long, maybe a little more than an hour. And we want to be able to reach out to affiliations. And so to do a Zoom conference, it would be like a conference. And so it would be very professional, and it would go through a lot of the things in a lot of depth that we are just touching on now. And that package will be talked about as well. So it's coming together. I know it's never quick enough, but we hope to have it out there ASAP.
Okay, so sometime this summer.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm hoping within, well, we're just heading into a new month soon. Well, we're not there yet, but hopefully by the end of July, it'll be all done.
Okay. All right. Well, I would like to just make a quick transition now to C8 so we don't run out of time too quickly tonight. So the bill is very similar in its definition of conversion therapy. So I don't think we need to go over that too much. So it covers transitions to another gender, change to heterosexual orientation, and reducing non-heterosexual attractions. And instead of targeting businesses, though, as the bylaws did, it will be including targeting parents. And that's what I think people really need to know, and I want them to take away from this call tonight. So if you want to take your child to a counselor because you want to help them to accept the gender that they were born with. So this is what that parent, Robert Hoogland, has been struggling to do out in BC. He's been under a publication ban until pretty recently, but his 14-year-old daughter wanted to change from her birth gender of female, and the courts have overruled his interventions. So that is still playing out in the courts. But so if you want to do that, if you want to take your child to a clergy member about unwanted same-sex attraction, or a church ministry, as Anne was mentioning, like Exodus or Courage, to work on their same-sex attraction, that would not be allowed. And as parents, I think, I mean, where does that really put us? Like, they're taking away all of the options that we would think would be in the best interest of our children. And it will even penalize parents who want to take their parents out of the country. So, I mean, talk about cutting off your possibilities. This is what this bill will really do. And it's frightening. And I think you said it's draconian. It is all of those things. It is very concerning, and we need to push back against it. So now I wanted to mention a few of the things that we can do. And of course, there's outreach, there's word of mouth. That's so important. People don't know what's going on. But there's tools that we have that can help you. Anne's working on a fabulous one, but we have some quick and dirty ones. We have a petition called Stop Bill C8, and you can stopbillc8.com. In addition, you might want to voice your opposition to this bill to your MP. And if you don't know who your MP is, you can find them at ourcommons.ca/members/en. So that is, again, ourcommons.ca/members/NEN. And you can put in there your postal code. It will tell you who your MP is, and then you can click the contact tab to get their contact information. So letters, calls, visits, if you can swing. Well, I don't even know if visits are a possibility right now, but calls and emails certainly are, and they're very well received, as we learned from Derek Sloan the other night. And finally, outreach to your own pastor, the leader of your mosque. Ask them to forward information on our petition. We also have a tab at our website. Our website is pafe.ca, and there's a tab at the top that is Bill C8. And one of the things you can find there is some talking points to write your letters. You can ask your pastors to forward all that information out with a petition and out however they're keeping in contact with their members. That would be terrific. Okay, so that is what I wanted to cover from our side. Now I just wanted to switch to Queenie you and ask for a minute. Do we have some questions that people are asking tonight, Queenie?
Just one question regarding research and of kids with same-sex attraction. Are they bullied more than kids without same-sex attraction? Do you know the data, Ann?
Well, I would think that, so I don't have data on that exactly as far as them being bullied more. Well, see, so you have children with same-sex attraction, but you have all kinds of other children who are bullied. Those who have physical and mental disabilities. You have a lot of other, actually 13% of those with disabilities have been severely bullied. So yes, I think those with same-sex attraction have habitually been targeted. People, I don't know, very many people who haven't been bullied at some level. Right now we're talking about racism, right? And the Black population. So qualitatively, it's very difficult because the LGBTQ is a very, very small percentage, has been under 2% for many, many decades since we've been tracking it. Now it's up to about 8% just in this last few years. So it's still a small percentage. So to say whether they're bullied more than other individuals, you'd have to look at the other, so 90% of the population. And I don't have that. I don't have that. Certainly they would say they've been bullied more. And we've seen evidence of those with transgender problems. They stand out as well, that they don't quite fit. And so those children, any child who doesn't fit whatever the mold is, who isn't popular in one way or another, is often bullied.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Ann. All right, well, unless we have any more questions, Queenie, you said that was the one. So is that, are we done for tonight? Okay, well, I just want to thank you so much, Ann. I've learned so much every time I talk to you. I feel like you're a great resource. And
oh, sorry, we have one other question.
Oh, we got a late breaking.
This is from Rachel. She says, there has been a rise of kids with autism identifying as transgender, and we see rapid onset gender dysphoria happening in groups of friends. How can we obtain research on this topic to share with our schools?
Okay, I didn't hear that totally in clarity, Queenie. I didn't hear the last part. I know the autism, up to 30%. They're saying up to 30% of those who are gender dysphoric also have autistic or are on the Asperger's. I've lost the screen. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you.
On the Asperger's continuum. So it is a high percentage, and Asperger's and autism itself is about the same percentage overall as those with gender dysphoria. So it's pretty interesting. Now, what was the last part that you said? How about the schools?
Yeah, so Rachel asks, how can we obtain research on this topic to share with our schools?
I'm just trying to think of what I have handy. I have some. If she wants to email you, Queenie, then I will try and get her some information
Sure.
as soon by tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow or Friday, because there's some pretty good studies out there on this.
Okay.
Okay.
We have another question as well.
Okay. That's fantastic. So shoot.
From Stephen and Nella. Why so many governing bodies listed in the sites of the American Medical or Social Work Psychological Associations argue against the use of conversion therapy and support the ban?
Why do they do that? Well, because this has been a political issue, and I talk about this whole trajectory since 1948. And so that's not pertaining just to conversion therapy, but certainly there is a lot of corruption in academia. I will just say that right out. And so those organizations, one thing that you need to recognize is that I think it's about 40%. So the American Psychological